Hi everyone, welcome to the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. Apologies for the slight delay in the starting of the session. We had a few technical hiccups, but good to finally be on and talking to you for the next 35 minutes or so. My name is Paul Woods. I'm the founder of a company called Adopt and Embrace, and really looking forward to spending the time with you over the next little while to discuss a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and hopefully near and dear to your heart as well, which is designing the perfect team or teams in Microsoft Teams using a framework we call the 10 Ps. Before we get into the content, first of all, if you want to engage with me after the session, please feel free to follow on Twitter or reach out on Twitter. My handle is @PaulWoods. Give a quick thank you to the sponsors of the event today. Thank you for everything you do to support the event. And what I really love about this event as well is that we're donating a lot of the sponsors, 10% of the funds from sponsors, to some really great community charities. So well done to the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon team for arranging that as well. So let's talk about the topic of the day, 10 Ps of Microsoft Teams design and how can we make Microsoft Teams work for you. Now, we've been using Microsoft Teams since it came out in the market, a little bit before Microsoft Teams came out into the market, just over 3.5-ish years ago now. And I remember when we first started working with customers to try and understand the potential of Microsoft Teams that we all understood within our organization. Over time, we started to see patterns emerging in some of the questions that were being asked by many of the people that we were talking to. So for example, when is the right time to create a team? How many teams should I be a member of? If I create a team, what is the right number of channels, or what kinds of channels should I be setting up in the particular team? And it was after this kind of repetition, we started to see these questions starting to come from customers, that we started to develop a little bit of a framework to help us navigate the answers to those questions. And originally there was just 3 things that we used to think about to answer all of those questions. Like, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the purpose of the team coming together? And who are the people that you need to engage with in that team to help you solve that particular problem and achieve that purpose? And that gave us a really great idea about how to, when to create a team. When is the right time to create a team? When is the right time to split a team into 2 teams or things like that? But over time, as we kind of used that with a few customers, again, we got to see these patterns emerging and some of the additional questions and the additional nuance that started to come out. So over time, I guess, in getting punched in the face by our customers and working through conversations with people, not just IT teams, but people out in the field to understand exactly how they can use Microsoft Teams to the best of their ability to solve business problems, improve work practices and alike, we developed the 10 Ps framework that I'll talk about today. And the 10 Ps framework is a great tool that you can use basically as I think of it like a Rosetta Stone, a common language that you can have between IT and the business to help navigate some of these Teams design challenges that you might face, and ultimately help you capture in a consistent way some of the really successful models or patterns that you've seen emerging within your organization as well, and share them with other people. Originally we got it to 9 Ps, and we had a bit of a joke and said, like, we can't have 9 Ps, we've got to have a 10th P. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story about how we came up with the last P at the end of the day as well. So today we'll focus on Microsoft Teams design, how we make the perfect team, create the perfect team within Microsoft Teams, using this framework to guide us. Now, if you want to go into any more detail behind the 10P framework and what I'm talking about today, just recently we wrote a book. It's been out in the market for about 6 months. It's called Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams, a manager's guide to communication, collaboration, and coordination with Microsoft Teams. Coincidentally, we wrote that book entirely in Microsoft Teams, so that's the product of 4 or 5 months of a group of people, 4 different authors, 2 different editors working together across international boundaries and state boundaries as well, who didn't meet face to face the entire time. So it's kind of a good example of what can be achieved with really great team design and really great process around how you engage in team to produce some particular output. But if you want to go into any more detail about what I'm talking about today, if you haven't got a copy of the book already, you can grab a copy of it on paperback, on Kindle or ebook, and it was just recently released on Audible as well, if you are into audiobooks too. So with that, let's have a look at this. We call it the Adopt and Embrace 10 Ps of Microsoft Teams design. And what I'll do, I'll just move my face to the other side of the screen, so get it out of the way. And what we'll go through each one of these one by one. So this is basically the bulk of the presentation, is this slide, and talking to each of these different things that we want to consider to help us design the perfect team. So let's talk about each of them one by one. The first P is problem. Now, I don't know about you, but if you want to change a behavior or change anything in your personal life, or change anything in terms of what how you engage with your family, or something to do with yourself, almost always the key to sustainable change or sustainable long-term changes in your behaviors or in your attitudes in life is to recognize that a problem exists in the first place. So if you think about it in your personal life, maybe you're running up a hill and you're getting really sweaty and you're short of breath, and you get to the top and think, what, I really am unfit. That's there's a symptom here. I might be eating too many burgers and I'm not getting enough exercise. There's a kind of clearly defined problem here. And that's what you can ground your decisions in terms of your improvements in life, in terms of going out and going to the gym, eating better or eating healthier, because you've identified that problem and you recognize that problem exists in the first place. And when we think about it in a work context, when we want to change behaviors or change the way we do things or how we communicate or how we collaborate together, it's much easier for us to make that change if we recognize that a problem exists in the first place. When we think about the transition to Microsoft Teams and starting to use Microsoft Teams in the workplace, we just don't want to replicate how we used to do things before. We don't just want to take the old distribution lists or email lists that we were using before. We don't want to take the organizational chart and just replicate it in Teams. We want to start thinking about actually solving business problems or solving problems in terms of how we work together. So as a group, if we can identify a single problem that we're going to solve, that's the great start of a Microsoft team design, to design a team in Microsoft Teams. What we generally recommend is that we only try and solve one problem per team. So don't try and create a team that solves lots and lots and lots of different problems. You've got quite a lot of teams at your disposal within Office 365. You can have up to 500,000 teams at the moment, and I'm sure that will extend more in the future. So there's really necessarily no limit to the number of teams you can create. So you've got this ability to create some fine-grained nuance in terms of the different teams that you're a member of. And if you can have them just focus on solving one problem at a time, that means that everyone that's joining that team can be really focused about, clearly solving that business problem for your organization, or managing that business process that you might have, or delivering that project that you might be coming together for as well. So problem's the first P. Be really clear about the problem that you're trying to solve when you're creating the team in the first place. The second P is purpose. Now, we want to understand what is the purpose of all the people that we're bringing together in a space to do. What do we bring them together to do? What is the purpose of everyone coming together? And we think that the purpose has a really strong correlation to the name of the team that you're creating. So the name of your team should clearly articulate in 50 characters or less, because that's all you've got in terms of the size of your team name, what is the purpose of your team. And that way that people that are outside of the team can clearly understand what the reason that team exists and why you're there. So from an IT point of view, you can clearly see that there's a reason for that team to exist. Clearly there's a purpose line to it. But for help you navigate between all the different teams you're a member of, having that purpose there really helps you understand exactly where you should be focusing your attention throughout the workday as well. So being clear about the purpose, that's really, really important. That aligns to the name of your team. The next P is people. Now, we want to understand who are the people that we want to engage with in the team. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. First of all, we want to make sure that we have the right people in the team to achieve the purpose and solve the problem that we had in the first place. If we don't have the right people in the team, we might need to rethink the membership of the team so we can invite more people in, or reduce the amount of people that are in the space depending on what we're trying to do. Second part of this is making sure that we understand the different information security needs of different people as well. So this is where things like we can make decisions around whether or not we break a team into 2 different teams or 3 different teams because of different information security needs, or potentially use things like private channels to help manage information security and privacy and things like that within the team. So for example, we might have a team, a problem that we're trying to solve, and we have a really clearly defined purpose, and we're going to have 12 people join that team. Now, if all 12 of those people have the exact same information security needs, like they can have the same access to the same information and the same conversations, that's fine. That's going to work really, really well inside a single team. But if we have one subgroup that maybe have a slightly different information security need, like for example, you might have a team of 12 and 3 of that team are team leaders, and those team leaders have a slightly different need to have a bit more confidential information or a bit more financial information that everyone else on the team shouldn't see. That's a really interesting situation where we could either make a decision to use a private channel for that smaller subgroup to kind of keep all that information together and have those conversations, or potentially break that off into a separate team entirely for those team leaders. So we have a design decision we need to make around the people that we're going to have involved in the team. Now, one comment about the people and the subgroups, like I explained there. If you have one subgroup like that example there, the team leaders, private channels can work quite well in that scenario if you're okay with some of the limitations of private channels. For example, how you can't schedule meetings in there, etc. But if you have more than two subgroups, or like you've got 3 or 4 or 5 different subgroups with different information security needs, what we'd recommend is instead of having different private channels for each different group, break them into different teams entirely. One of the challenges with private channels is if you have one subgroup, it's very easy to remember that mental model in your mind in terms of who has access to what across the different channels. But if you have 2 or 3 or 4 subgroups, you lose that mental model very quickly in terms of who can actually engage in those different private channels. If you have 6 different private channels with like 3 different membership structures within them, you're always going to be looking at that membership list to try and understand who's got access to what. So you increase the risk of, potentially, disclosing information you don't want to the rest of that channel or to the rest of the team if you don't consider potentially breaking that up into separate teams themselves. So people is really important there. The other thing to consider with people is, are we going to have external guests or external participants in the team as well? And if we're going to have external participants in the team, it's always great to think about, well, you know what, maybe we should go back to that purpose step and just put a little open brackets, ext, close brackets at the start of the team name to make it really clear that there's an external participant in the team as well. So we make sure we don't disclose anything that isn't like company specific information that we shouldn't be disclosing. So far we've got problem, purpose, and people. We want to solve one problem per team. If you've got more than one problem, you can break it into 2 different teams or 3 different teams. You want to have one clear purpose per team. And if you've got more than one purpose, it's probably best to break it into smaller teams, each team with its own specific purpose. And then from a people point of view, we can think about, depending on the different information security needs of those people, whether or not we break that into separate teams or not. The last one here in terms of structuring our team is priorities. And if you ask people, like when we normally do a workshop like this face-to-face, I'd ask people, what is the right number of what is the right number of priorities that a member of a team could have or a team could have? And some people will say, look, you could have up to 8 or 10 priorities, and you could focus on all of them at once. And some people will say, no, it's just one priority we could focus on at a time. If we look at the research and we look at the literature, the sweet spot for the number of priorities of a team is somewhere between 3 and 7 priorities. Any more than that, you'll lose focus on those things and you won't get them done. Any fewer than that, you might, might not have thought about the problem that you're trying to solve all that much at all. So when we think about priorities, what you want to do is map the priorities of that group that are coming together. And those priorities will probably align pretty nicely to the channels that you should set up in your team. So don't just randomly, organically create channels. Think about the priorities of that group of people coming together in solving that problem and achieving that shared purpose. And if you can get those priorities, you can prioritize them potentially even using the alphanumeric, the naming structures. You could have 1, 2, 3, 4 to have some channels at the top of the list, or so on and so forth. You could use emojis to have higher priority on some of those channels, but those channels should map to those different priorities you have there. What we'd probably say is if you have more than 8 priorities, it's probably a good opportunity to break it into 2 different teams. Yes, you can have dozens or hundreds of channels in your team, but that isn't necessarily a great thing from a design point of view on how you structure your work. If I'm a member of a team and there's like 87 channels and 81 of them have nothing to do with my work, the rest of those channels are just a distraction. And yes, there are ways to control whether they're hidden or not, but I still will get notifications, I'll still get other things coming up into my work that will distract me from the things I need to get done. So we want to kind of try and make sure that I'm only seeing the stuff that I need to see to get my work done. And then I can potentially discover stuff that I need over time by joining additional teams, but I'm in control of that and it's not being force fed to me because I'm a member of a team with lots and lots of stuff going on in it. So with those 4 Ps, problem, purpose, people, and priorities, we've got the structure of our team down pat now. We understand whether we've got 1 team, 3 teams, 5 teams, or more. We've got a really clear naming way we can name the team. We understand who's going to be involved in the team, and we've got really clear priorities, which maps to our channels, which is great. Now the next steps are kind of thinking about, well, how are we going to work in this space and how are we going to add value to this space and help us deliver more in this space as well. So the next P is principles. And principles is around how do we as a group, the people that are going to engage in this team, agree on how we're going to collaborate, how we're going to communicate, and how we're going to coordinate in this particular space. Now, there's lots of different principles that we can think about here. So for example, the first one could be, how often are we going to check this team, or how often are we going to engage in this team, and when should we expect the reply to a message we post here? Now, there's some problems or some purposes that you might have here which require, maybe you only need to check in once every month. Some might require a check-in every hour, depending on what the cadence of the conversation or the communication collaboration is going to be. So you need to agree in terms of service level agreements between each other in terms of how often you're going to check in and respond to messages. Other things we can agree on is, how are we going to use the general channel? Is the general channel going to be used as a space where we can talk about how we work together, which is generally what we recommend, or are we going to use it as a free-for-all kind of conversation from a social point of view? Again, some people have different expectations. You're going to have a bit of a mismatch there. So we want to make sure we all agree on what those principles are around the general channel as well. If I like a message, what does that actually mean? Does a like mean that I've read your message? Does a like mean that I acknowledge your message? Or does a like mean that I approve your message? So thinking about what those different signals mean within Microsoft Teams as well. And my favorite one to talk about is, when are we going to use notifications or mentions, using mentions within our posts? One of the biggest mistakes we see with Teams usage is when people overuse the app mention. The value of the app mention is completely diminished if you use it in every single post when you're trying to get a hold of me. So one of the things we recommend you agree to as a principle is only use the app mention when you want the other person to take some kind of time-bound action off the back of your message. Don't mention me when you reply to me. Don't mention me when you just want me to see a post. Mention me only when you need me to actually do something. And that way, when I open up Teams in the morning, I might have 3 notifications as opposed to 33 notifications, and it helps me triage my day and focus on the priorities that I have at the start of my day as well, or during the day. So agreeing on what those kinds of signals mean to us is really, really important. There's a few other things we can think about in terms of principles, but we'll move on and we can talk about that a little bit later in the session. The next one is plugins, and this really, and in most organizations and in most teams, what this really relates to is the tabs that we're going to add to the channels within our team. What is that additional functionality or capability we're going to introduce into the space to help us get our job done, to help us achieve our shared purpose and ultimately solve that problem that we're trying to solve by bringing this team together? The most commonly used tab, if you look at the latest Sweep Analytics benchmarking reports, is the Excel tab. And there's lots of really simple business processes within every organization that rely on Excel today. So you can see the reasons why that's the most commonly used tab. The other one that can get a lot of value for you, though, is that website or browser tab. It gives you the ability to frame in any of those third-party software as a service applications, those web applications that you use that are very specific line of business applications or project management applications or whatever. And you can frame that deep link to very specific records or objects in those systems using that website or browser tab, which makes it really easy to engage with knowledge outside of the team and engage with processes outside of the team, etc. Now, the only thing to remember with that browser or the website tab is as long as the URL starts with HTTPS, there's a pretty good chance it's going to work in that tab. So, great opportunity to integrate that project management system, that customer relationship management system, or construction management system, or whatever that is, into the space that's relevant to the conversation, those priorities that you have in that particular team. The other thing I'd say is don't necessarily worry too much about connectors or bots or other things like that straight away. Those things can come with time as you build confidence and fluency in terms of how you're using the space. You don't have to have them all set up right at the start. Just start with some of the basics like the tabs to kind of get the ground, get things running. After plugins, we talk about permissions. Now, permissions is really thinking about a couple of things. First of all, what is the role of the team owner and what do we want the team owner to actually do within the team? And then what are the different controls we can put in place in the team to help them achieve that? So for example, we might have a policy in our organization that says the team owners are responsible for all the information that's captured or curated in that team, and they need to be accountable for making sure that information ends up in a system of record somewhere else, like a SharePoint document repository off to the side where final documents need to live, or a records management system, or a patient management or student management system that we might have in our organization. So being really clear about what the accountabilities of the team owner actually are. And then other things like what can a member of a team do? What can a guest of a team do? Down into the details of what level of security, what level of maturity will we apply to gifts? Will we be allowed to put gifts in the team? All those kinds of things as well. Those little controls we can put in place. That becomes really important, particularly in education space as well. So what can a teacher or an educator do versus a student, et cetera, et cetera. So those permissions will vary depending on the industry and the context that you're working in. But we need to make sure we think about that on a team-by-team basis as well, because it may vary depending on from project to project or different use cases that you're using Teams for. After permissions, we need to think about performance. So what does success look like? How are we going to measure whether or not we've been successful in improving the way we communicate, collaborate, or coordinate with Microsoft Teams within this team? Now, when we think about measuring success, it's a few different things you can think about here. First of all, are we helping ourselves achieve our professional goals? Like, are we actually achieving the set purpose that we had in the particular space? But are we also helping us achieve some personal goals as well, which might be reducing email overwhelm or increasing our situational awareness of what's going on at work? If you have some kind of metrics there that are business metrics, you can tie it back to. So maybe it's improving a process, and where you say you're saving time or saving money, improving in customer experience, where you have a net promoter score as a measure. You could use these measures to measure the success of this collaboration effort that you're putting together. But having some kind of success metric allows you to bring together everyone in the team to understand exactly what the outcome is that you're trying to drive towards, and kind of measure your progress along the way as well. After performance, we want to think about provisioning. So this one is going to be a little bit different depending on the organization that you're working in. But in some organizations, you might have complete open access to Microsoft Teams, and you can create a team whenever you want. So you might provision your team just by hitting the create team button yourself. In other organizations, you might have to put a service desk request in via ServiceNow or some other ticketing application that you might have where IT will help you create that team. We call that an IT assisted provisioning model. You might have an opportunity, because it's something you'd use quite regularly, to maybe template the design that you've got here. So it could be templated using either PowerShell today or some of that new native Teams templating stuff that was announced at Build just recently as well. Or finally, it could be completely automated, where the creation of the team is automatically triggered by some other system within your organization. Say when your project management system, there's an approval for a new project, it spins up a team automatically with all the right channels and all the right documentation for that project within the team itself within seconds. So depending on the context and the use case, what problem you're solving and the purpose of the team coming together, there'll be a correct provisioning model based on that context and the regulations or the policies within your organization. One thing we'd say though with provisioning, if you're thinking about templating or automating, don't try and do that straight away. Actually just create it manually in the first case and try and test it first before you codify some of those things into the templating or automating, because you want to learn those mistakes first before you repeat the mistake hundreds of times through automation or things like that. And that was the 9th P. And then we thought, oh, we've got to think of a 10th P, because you can't have 9 Ps, you have to have 10 Ps, you have to have a round number. And this last one, perishability, started as a bit of a joke, because it's about the last word we could think of that started with P. But it's actually one of the most important Ps in hindsight that we need to consider. And that is, what are we going to do when this team is finished? Now, once we've solved that problem, we've kind of completed the purpose of the group coming together, we've measured our performance, we can clearly see that we've achieved what we're trying to achieve. Now, what are we going to do with the conversations or the information that is available within this team? Is it of any value to our organization? How are we going to make sure it gets into places where we can retain that over time? Or can we dispose of it right now so we don't have to have it as searchable content down the track? Now, it's really important to think about this when you start out the process, so you can kind of clearly think about this as you use the space as well, and it's not an afterthought at the end of the day. There's absolutely some use cases where it makes a lot of sense to not dispose of information or not to get rid of any team information after you finish the project. A good example would be if you're running an event that happens every year, and you want to keep that documentation available for when you run the event next year and the year after and the year after that. So yes, you might not be using the team anymore, but you still want to access that information to help you run the event in future years to come. There's other scenarios or situations where you don't need any of the information kept at all, and it's a great opportunity for it to be disposed of straight away. But if you think about that, you can then work with your IT team to help set up a particular retention or disposal schedule for that particular team. And you can set who's accountable for the different things you're going to do there. So is the team owner accountable for declaring when the team is finished and over, or is IT responsible for coming through and cleaning that up at the end of the day as well? If you think about what that all means, though, here's another slide which kind of gives you a one-liner for each of those different Ps. So what is the problem? What is the problem that is trying to be addressed at the moment? We want to try and address one problem per team. What is the purpose of the team coming together? That purpose should map very nicely to the name of the team. And we should only really be trying to do one thing at a time, one purpose at a time per team. If you've got multiple purposes or multiple problems, try and break it up into different teams. Who are the people that we want to work with, who we need to collaborate with, and what are their information security needs? Because that's going to dictate whether we break it up into more teams or we potentially use private channels to help overcome some of those information security needs we have to put in place. In terms of priorities, we want to think of up to 7 different priorities we have as a team. If you've got more than 7 priorities, break that up into separate teams themselves, because chances are a lot of those priorities don't relate to the people that you're inviting into the space as well. Those priorities should map very nicely to the channels and the channel names that you set up within the team. As a group, we need to come together, kind of form, storm, and norm some principles in terms of, what does a general channel mean? What does an app mention mean? When do we use high importance? How often should we check the channel? Are we going to engage in video conversations in this channel or not? We're going to have webcams on every time, so on and so forth. So we need to think about that. Plugins, how are we going to use the tabs, particularly that website tab, maybe the OneNote tab for shared meeting notes, and the website tab, the browser tab as well, and Excel, sorry, as well. Permissions, like who should have access to what are the roles and responsibilities of the team owner versus team members, etc. In terms of performance, what does success look like and how are we going to measure that? Thinking from it from both a professional point of view and a personal point of view as well. Provisioning, who is responsible for provisioning? Is it myself? Is it the IT service desk? Is it something we can template or something we can automate? And then finally, what are we going to do when this is finished? How are we going to capture lessons learned? How are we going to share that knowledge with the rest of the organization? How are we going to retain this for the future if we need it? Or how are we going to dispose of it? And what are the decisions we're going to make around that? As long as we're clear about that right at the start, that can absolutely set us up for success. So they're the 10 Ps. And what I'd like to share with you now is a bit of a workbook that we've developed to help you navigate this conversation, to help you kind of work through each of these different Ps and build that design for the perfect team. Now, this workbook I'm sharing with you now, this is available under Creative Commons. So you can pick this up today and use this within your organization, within your team, within your department, within your entire organization to help structure this conversation that you're probably having with many people within your organization already. So for example, the first 4 steps, problem, purpose, people, and priorities, is all about structuring your team. So here's the follow the bouncing ball workbook we have. Step 1, what is a business problem or opportunity that you're focused on? Fill in the box, helps you kind of get some clarity around what that problem is. And there's a little bit of a checklist here as well in terms of validating whether it's a good answer to that question. So in this case here, is this problem one that is both logical and rational and one that everyone would understand? Because that's going to help us get buy-in to change to this new way of working in Microsoft Teams. If it is, absolutely fantastic. Let's move to step 2. If not, let's go back and start refining this problem a bit more. And the tip that's kind of behind my head, if I do that, or behind my chair, is we only want to try and solve one problem at a time with a team. If there's more than one problem, that's a good opportunity to break it into 2 different teams. Step 2, what is the purpose of the team coming together? Again, being really clear about why we're here and what we're trying to achieve. Is it possible to summarize this in less than 50 characters? If so, that's a great team name that we could put in place here. Don't create your team name with a whole heap of prefaces for your organization, department, location, like your state or region, and then the team name. You want the most important information on the left-hand side. In most languages where you're reading from left to right, or if you're in a language where you read right to left, you want all that important information at the right-hand side of it. So we want to make sure we're not cluttering the names with all those prefaces. If you want to have all that information involved, put that as a suffix at the end of the name. We want to have the really important stuff right at the front. Now, can we clearly distinguish the purpose of the team based on the name that we've provided? If so, it passes a test. We can move on to step 3. Again, each team should have one purpose at a time. Who are the right people that should be involved in this team? Again, we can have a think about this. Are any of these participants external to the organization? If they are, we want to make sure that everyone knows about it. If so, we should go back to step 2 and add a little open brackets, ext, close brackets at the start of that name so it's really clear we've got external participants in that team. If not, we can go on to the next question, which is how many subgroups would need different levels of access? If there's 2 or more, you should probably split this team. Or, if you really want to try it, you can try and do it with private channels, but would recommend it's easier just by splitting the team itself in that case. If you've just got one subgroup, you could try it with a private channel. That won't be an issue. Step 4, what are your priorities? And then mapping that to the corresponding channel names. And again, if you have more than 7 priorities, chances are it's probably too many priorities or too much information in that particular space, or you're not thinking about the problem and the purpose in a granular enough way. So it's a great opportunity here to split that into different teams as well, to make it easy for everyone to focus their attention throughout their workday as well on the different things that they're working on. Remember that you can use like numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, or emojis using the Windows emoji keyboard. If you haven't used that before, it's the Windows key and the full stop button at the same time to add some prioritization to your priorities in that channel list as well. Then when it comes to forming our team, agreeing on principles like we talked about earlier, what is the general channel used for? What does an app mention mean? What do the different likes or different reactions mean to each other? When are we going to use the important message, important tag on a message? Are we going to use video or webcam in our meetings to remain connected as a team if we're engaging in videos and webcams? What are we doing around files? Where should files actually live? Should they all be within the channels in the conversations, or is there another file storage area that we're going to use? Johnny would recommend try and get as much of it in Teams as you can. Being really clear about expectations on responsiveness. So we expect everyone to react, be in here every week, every day, every hour, and being clear about that from the start. And then making sure everyone's had an opportunity to configure their notifications to suit their own personal needs as well. What you can do with this is you could document this within Microsoft Teams in potentially use the wiki tab if you really wanted to. We'd probably recommend not doing that and actually just setting it up as a Word document or a PDF, or potentially using the shared OneNote notebook that comes with Teams to document some of these decisions that you make here around principles. So if someone joins a team in the future, they can see all the things that you've agreed to in the past and know the expectations that are met with participating in the team as well. In terms of plugins, again, what do the tabs mean for each of the different channels if we're going to use tabs in the particular space? Again, that website tab, anything that starts with HTTPS is a good chance you can get that to frame into Teams really nicely, and you can deep link to specific objects or records in those systems. In terms of permissions, what is the team owner accountable for? What are the controls we're going to put into place in the team? And ultimately, does the team owner understand how Microsoft Teams is governed by your IT team? Do you understand the rules of the road in terms of how you're supposed to be using Teams in the context of your organization? Every organization has different rules, different approaches, different requirements. So we want to make sure we've got that all covered off as well. Ultimately, the team owners should be accountable for the performance and the goals of the team. And I know a lot of organizations, team owner is just the person that creates a team. We want to try and wrap some performance around this as well and make sure the team owner is accountable for making sure we achieve those things as well. How are we going to monitor that performance? Again, being really clear about goals. Do our goals blend both professional goals, like the KPIs we're trying to hit, as well as personal goals like reducing email, increasing flexibility of the team, etc. If we can do that, then we can move on. One tip here is try and keep it simple, but if we can align it to existing business goals that people are already measured on, already care about, that's a great idea to do here in terms of performance. In provisioning, like, is it something we can do ourselves? Is it IT assisted via service desk? Is it templated or is it automated? And if it is do it yourself, do people actually have the appropriate permissions to set up the team themselves? Because sometimes you might not have rolled out the permission to everyone in the organization. If you're going to create something more than once, it's a good idea to start thinking about how you template it or automate it, but just don't do that straight up. Try and create it first and get a feel for it before you put the template in place. And then finally, what happens at the end? How are we going to manage perishability? How are we going to capture the intellectual property and lessons learned from what we do in the team? What, if any, retention or archiving rules do we need to consider? And then based on these IP retention archiving needs of the team, have we reviewed the entire design to make sure we meet those requirements as well? Again, doing this at the start and having a really clear idea about what you're going to do at the end makes it so much easier to kind of keep on top of things when teams come to the natural end of life, if someone leaves the organization or things like that. So there you have it. That's the 10 Ps of Microsoft Teams design. Again, if you want to go into any more detail about those 10 Ps or see patterns of how you can apply those 10 Ps, again, in the book that we wrote, Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams, A Manager's Guide to Communication, Collaboration and Coordination with Microsoft Teams, Part 2 focuses entirely on the 10 Ps, and Part 3 is worked real-world examples of scenarios and patterns that use the 10 Ps that you can apply in your business straight away, whether it's running projects, running events, running onboarding programs, employee experience teams for one-on-ones and learning and development, all those kinds of things. So some real-world examples you can apply in your business as well. And again, available on Amazon, available on all book retailers, available on Audible as well if you're into ebooks too. So with that, thank you so much for joining me today for the session. Hopefully you've got lots of value out of that. Apologies for the slight delay in getting started. What I'd love to do, if you've got any questions or anything like that, please feel free to reach out in the Q&A throughout the workspace, through the Teams live event. So I get my words together now. Ask any questions you have in the Q&A. I'll respond back to that directly within the Q&A itself. But with that, thank you so much for joining today, and I hope you have the great rest of your day and a great rest of your evening if it's evening where you are right now.